Alright guys, Tuesday evening, welcome back to the channel, the restoration of my 1968 Triumph TR250, and we are about to turn a corner and start putting parts back on the car. That's always a nice point of the restoration when you're dealing with new or newly restored parts to put back on a nice clean frame. So we'll do that shortly. There's a couple housekeeping things I wanted to take care of first before we get to that point. Number one housekeeping is the fact that if you've been watching my videos for a long period of time, you may have noticed yesterday that you'll start seeing advertisements on my video. So when you see advertisements, that means that I've decided to monetize my channel and make a little bit of money off of my views. And I've resisted doing this for the past 10 years, and I think I've almost got about 800 videos up on my channel now, but I've resisted actually monetizing the channel for various reasons, but now I've decided that I'm going to go ahead and monetize the channel in order to bring in a little bit of revenue, just so I can do things like replace the video camera that I'm holding in my hand right now. I've gone through probably 7 or 8 video cameras in the course of shooting those 800 videos. As you can imagine, a garage environment is not a great place for a video camera, so they take a lot of abuse out here. So I'm at the point where I need to replace my video camera again, so I figure what I can do is whatever little revenue I make from YouTube, I can put back into the channels to keep bringing you videos. So that's housekeeping point number one. Number two is just having a look at the analytics on my channel. I'm seeing that less than 50% of my views on my channel are actually done by subscribers. So if you're watching this channel and you're not subscribed to my channel and you're enjoying the content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll be notified of any new videos that I post. So that's just a plea from me to subscribe if you are not subscribed currently. And if you are subscribed, thanks very much. Alright, there's the two housekeeping things out of the way. Let's talk a bit more about the project. Alright guys, as mentioned, we have turned the corner and we are about to start putting parts back on the car. And as you saw in my video yesterday, I've kind of got the car surrounded by new parts, restored parts, old parts, etc. And we'll work our way through those and get them back on the frame shortly. I've decided that I'm going to work on the front suspension first. I think there's a few more components to the front suspension than there are in the rear. I am unfortunately missing the brake rotors, as mentioned in my previous video as well. I do have a line on some new rotors that will be available to me on Thursday. I'm just going to have to go pick them up from one of our local vendors. Unfortunately, they're stock rotors. They're not the performance rotors that I was looking for, the drilled and slotted ones. But the stock ones will do for now until I can swap those out at a later date. At least they'll get me rolling. So that's kind of important to me to be able to get this into a rolling form. Parts delivery from the US. If I was going to order these, I'd probably order them from British Parts Northwest. They have a pretty good deal on free shipping right now, and with free shipping within the US, and actually pretty good pricing on their performance rotors from TRW. But the only problem is it takes a long time now for me to get anything from the US, probably a couple of weeks at least, it seems, to get it across through customs and up to me. So I'm not willing to wait that long to get this into a rolling format, so we're going to sacrifice and go with the stock rotors initially. So I've got the manuals out here ready to go, the spare parts catalog, and my Haynes and my Bentley. I'm pretty much familiar with these cars, and I'll probably do it blindfolded assembly wise, but there are things that I need to know, like torque values, etc. So I refer to the manuals when required. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to you might have noticed I have the tap and die set out over there, so I'm going to start tapping holes out. And the very first thing we're going to work on is we're going to install the upper fulcrum pin here. So we're going to tap these holes out on these sides, these 8 holes, and we'll start putting the very first parts back on this car. Okay, so we're going to start with the front suspension, and I've mentioned that I bought a Magic kit for the front suspension. So Magic kits are produced by the Roadster factory in Pennsylvania. The part number for this Magic kit is RFK 1330. It is a Magic kit for the front suspension and is urethane packing pieces and urethane bushings. So let's take it apart and see what's involved in this Magic kit. Alright guys, just going through the bag of contents, and I've just got it laid out on the table, and just trying to identify what is what. Some of it's labeled and some of it's not. Obviously these are the trunnions and the through bolts, and looks like the trunnion seals that are there as well. This looks like it's for the upper fulcrum. I'm not sure what these are for, but I'll figure it out. So all sorted hardware, locking plates. And then we get into upper control arm bushings, lower control arm bushings. These are for either the sway bar or the steering rack bushings. These are all the thrust washers, oil seals, and other stuff for the lower control arms. New ball joints, new tie rods, and new spring packings. So that's the contents of the magic kit. Let's make some magic. Alright guys, as mentioned, I have on the floor over here an assortment of new and old parts. So obviously anything that's bagged up is an old part that's been tagged and labeled. And the reason why I have those out here is for this example right here. So here are the driver's side front suspension bags that I've just pulled out. And remember I was talking about these fasteners here looking like they might be the fulcrum bolts, the upper fulcrum bolts. There's no labeling on here. So the good thing is that I've got this tag, driver's side upper fulcrum bag 115. I did it on Easter Sunday, I'm not sure what year, but anyway, so there are the old upper fulcrum bolts. Here are the new ones. So you have the old and the new to compare, and they actually look like they're right. So we can go ahead and use the new fasteners. So I just do that from a comparison perspective. Things like, again, the shims, I have no idea how many shims I'm going to require because this is an entirely new frame to this car. I did record the shims, and if you watched my previous videos, I mentioned how important it is to record the shims specifically if you're going back with your original frame. And you can see that I've got recorded here. This is the driver's side. This is the front. There are 3 shims in the front and there are 6 shims in the rear. I've got a total of 9 shims here. Anyway, we're not going to put these shims back in. We're obviously going to have to take it to an alignment shop to be able to do this. So we'll just keep these shims off to the side. We're going to clean them up, obviously. We'll probably soak them in that derusting solution. But anyway, there's just a good example of how important it is to bag and tag your parts, particularly when you're doing a long restoration. I mean, this restoration is going on, I don't know how many years, 2.5 years maybe, so there's no way you're going to remember what all this stuff is, so it's important to bag and tag. Some of you also might remember that I actually have a volume out here, a binder that's actually got very specific instructions by bag number and by day that I've taken off the car initially, so I can actually go back even if I wanted to reference a video, for example, of me taking something off the car. I can actually tell by looking at the actual day in my journal and at the bag number. I can reference it back to a video if I need to, or still photos for that matter. So that's also another good thing to do when you're doing a restoration. The only other bag I have here is the lower control arm. And this reminds me that I had an issue, and I've just actually viewed the video before I came out here. I had an issue with getting one of the bolts off of the lower control, the spring pan actually. This was the one that was holding the bracket for the sway bar that would not come off, so we ended up cutting that off. And it's always good to keep a reference, even if you have a broken bolt, just keep a reference. That'll sort of jog your memory as to what happened when you took this off the car. And just a quick shot of the remainder of the paraphernalia for the front suspension that I've kept, even right down to the old cotter pins. So you just got an assortment of different sizes of bolts. Some look newer and some look older. Some are a little bit bent. You can see this one's got a pretty good bend in it. Anyway, again, just for reference to see what was in the car. Again, that may not be correct necessarily. That's where the spare parts catalog comes into reference. You can always reference what's supposed to be correct for this car in general if you need to. So that's good to have that standing by. Old bushes, the old seal. We'll talk a little bit about this a little bit later on, because there's a lot of confusion regarding this oil seal or this felt seal for the rear of the hub. So we'll get to that point in the restoration. We'll have a little bit of a chat. Alright guys, so let's get to work. We've got everything laid out. We've already moved some new parts over, and we're ready to start. Alright guys, before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of products that I'm going to be using on this project, particularly in the front and rear suspension. So first thing is, just let it be known that we're going to be using anti-seize on all of the threaded fasteners. So when I go to restore this car 50 years from now, everything's going to come apart easily. So use anti-seize on everything, number one. Number two, we are not going back with rubber bushings. These are rubber bushings, and they are definitely perished. They're past their lifetime. Rubber bushings that are on the market, not just rubber bushings, but rubber, ball joint boots or rubber steering rack gaiters, for example, they do not last very long these days. The rubber is crap that's on the market. I know guys who are doing restorations who have not even had their car on the roads yet, and the bushings or the boots have perished already. So that's why we've decided to go with polyurethane bushings. Now, you could go with something even harder than polyurethane. You could go with nylotron, for example. My TR6 has nylotron bushings in the front suspension. It has poly bushings in the rear suspension. So it actually has nylotron from good parts. Now, we're going to go with poly bushings on here. So poly bushings, it's my understanding, and I'm no expert, but poly bushings, my understanding that you cannot use a petroleum-based grease on poly bushings. So what we've got are two different types of grease. I'm going to use one of them in particular, and let's talk about this one first of all. I bought this synthetic grease initially, as I thought what I was looking for I couldn't find initially, so we got this as a backup grease. Normally what I would use is a product called Silglide, which is a silicone-based grease. Now Silglide, actually Napa makes it, and I called my local Napa, and they've discontinued it here in Canada. It looks like I can get it on Amazon in the US, but it looks like it's difficult to get here in Canada. So we're not going to be using Silglide, which is my number one choice. This would be my backup choice, but we're going to try something a little bit different. So this is a Permatex silicone brake lubricant. So it's the green one. There's also a couple of different colors. There's an orange one that has ceramic in it, and I believe there's a purple one as well. Anyway, this one doesn't have the ceramic in it. So it's just a silicone brake lube, so it's very sticky. Normally, if you're looking at something like Super Pro bushings, for example, they come with their own little packets of lubrication, of grease. These do not. So we're going to be using this silicone brake lubricant as my grease on my bushings. It does say, if you go to the Permatex website, that it can be used on bushings, and it can be used on, I think it says, long and short bolts and bushings. So it's got a lot of different applications other than just brake lubricant. So we're going to be using this on our polyurethane suspension bushings, front and rear. Just a quick note, this stuff is expensive. So that little tub was $34.44. So it's expensive, but hopefully it'll be worth it. Last thing you want is your polyurethane bushings to be squeaking after 2 weeks. All right, let's get to work. Enough gabbing. All right, guys, we're going to start by installing the upper fulcrum pin, and there are two ways to install this, the right way and the wrong way. The way I've got it situated or oriented right now is the wrong way. You kind of naturally want to position it this way just because it follows that curve of this top shock tower nicely, but that's actually incorrect. It should actually be this way. If you get this wrong, I believe it will affect the camber significantly on your front tire. Camber or caster. So anyway, get it on the right way. I'm not actually sure how much of this I should actually film, but I guess we'll do the one side, and then we'll leave the other side. Maybe Les can come and do it for me. Anyway, just pushing the bushings into the upper control arms, and it's an easy fit. I'm not actually lubing the inside of the control arm. I'm actually just going to lube inside the actual bush, because that's what actually rides on the actual fulcrum pin up here. So anyway, we'll just continue on. So just thought I'd show you that we're just adding the bushings in here. The bushings are pushed in. Pretty simple, nice tight fit, and we'll just put those onto the upper fulcrum pin. Alright guys, ball joint is next, and just a quick note that the bolts on the ball joint are reversed, so I'm not sure whether it matters whether the inner or the outer, but it's just the fact that they're reversed. Lock nut and washers, and again, we're just not tightening anything up to torque values yet. We're just sort of snugging it up. We'll go back and torque it later. Still haven't put the castle nuts or the washers on here yet, so we're just fitting it up loosely to begin with, and then, like I said, we'll torque it down and make sure everything is correct. Alright guys, upper control arm on the driver's side now installed. Again, not torqued down, not cotter pinned, for example. Once we torque it, we'll put a little paint mark on it to make sure that we know that we've torqued it to value, so we won't go back and redo it or forget to do it. So we'll put a little paint mark on that when we're done. Anyway, let's move on to the other side. We'll do the same thing on the top just to get those parts out of the way. Alright guys, now that the upper control arms are done, or upper wishbones, whatever you want to call them, we've divided up the remaining parts to do the lower part of the suspension. And there's a few other bits in here like the shock components. So we've divided it up half and half. I've already checked this trunnion. This is for the driver's side, this is for the passenger side, based on the thread. And I think we're pretty much ready to go. So let's figure out what we're going to do here. We'll probably do driver's side first, and we'll take you along when we start putting parts back on. Alright guys, I've got Les here, and I'm just showing him an issue that I've encountered. And I verified it with my frame that I have in the backyard, which is the frame that came with this car. And I'll have to do a little bit more research. But, okay, so I'm working on the lower control arms. And you can see that this has an added reinforcement piece put in here. I believe my frame in the back has also had a reinforcement piece put in. But that reinforcement piece goes from sort of the back over to the corner here of this upper stanchion spring support. So what's happened is when I put this bracket in for the control arm, it will go in like so, but the problem is now when I go to put the through bolt in to put the lower control arms, it fouls. So I've got no way to get the bolt through with a nut on it. So that means I'm going to actually have to notch this bracket out. So we're going to have to cut a little clearance out in this bracket in order to get the bolt through with a nylock on the end. So I just thought I'd share that with you. So whoever did this frame didn't modify it correctly, unfortunately. It's not major, but it will take some modification to fix that. Just thought I'd share that with you. What do you think of that?
I have two frames. One.
Yeah, no, we're not switching frames at this point. I'm just going to cut a little bit off of here. So anyway, we could go look at your frames though and research them and see what the heck they look like. But anyway, sure. Nothing like what my frame looks like in the backyard. So like I said, I'm going to take it away and do some more research before I cut. But obviously that currently is an issue, and I think we're going to be done for tonight. 8 o'clock, time for a cup of tea, or time for a nap for you.
I've been out in the heat all day.
Yeah. All right. We'll be back sometime.